Hey friends, I am back with chapter 3 of My Time to Stand. Looks like Gypsy does more justifying of pimp juice and vilifying of Dee Dee whenever their actions are nowhere near equal. This chapter is called Share. It says term of endearment, love or dear. So let's get right into it, friends. Gypsy says, my father was not present at my birth. As I wrestled my way out of my mama, he was getting wasted tripping on acid with his friends for 4 days at the Tarpon Rodeo, a fishing tournament over on Grand Isle. Minutes old and swaddled sweetly, I imagined my gaze enchanting my mother with a love and fixed attention she had never known. And that's when she decided I was not to be shared. It's interesting that Gypsy chose to put that in print because she has absolutely no way of knowing that. Also, considering that we know that Dee Dee had boyfriends after Rod and Gypsy ran them off, she told us so in her email. She talked about spitting on the one man who fixed up a room for Gypsy and Dee Dee at his place. It sounds like Dee Dee did actually want to share a family life with Gypsy with someone else. What do y'all think, friends? Am I right or am I reaching there? When they cut the cord that connected us, defensively, she held me tighter. Again, how does she know? This is pure projection. It was just me and Mama against the world, she'd say. From the get-go, even when my dad decided very soon after birth that he would give it another go with Dee Dee and try to make it work, and moved us all into a rented house not far from Claude and Emma. I appreciate the fact that my dad, still so young and carefree, would love me enough to attempt to give me a family he thought I deserved. But he and Mama still couldn't be intimate together, and with my dad unable to talk himself into feeling a romantic love for Mama he never had, so he left her a second time, this time for good. See what I mean, friends? Everything Rod does is put in the absolute best light possible, even when it's pretty terrible actions. Okay, Gypsy says, my dad gave us financial support, but let's face it, he was still a kid. And whatever he strung together didn't help my mother afford the rented house. So she asked her parents if she and I could move in and stay with them for a while until my mother could get on her own feet. She had quit the hospital where she'd worked as a nurse's aide. We told you should have never gotten pregnant. You should have never married Rod in the first place, Mama Imsy said, adding a click of the tongue for good measure. But fine, you can stay here. That's when Mama and I moved back to the Blue House, where we would live until I was about 5 years old. She expresses no sympathy for the fact that Dee Dee was trying to do that on her own, but she expresses total appreciation for the fact that Rod made an attempt, even though he was so young and carefree. Good Lord, friends. Gypsy says, after my arrest, my story swept the world as an egregious example of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological condition in which a parent or caregiver claims their dependent, typically a child, has a non-existent illness. But I see now that my upbringing encompassed way more dysfunction than that. My mother's possessiveness tortured me as equally as the faked illnesses and unneeded surgeries. I'm still peeling back the layers that reveal elements of control and complete domination, which she established using several techniques over multiple domains of my life, not just my healthcare. I don't want to believe she was conscious of her ways. It's so hard to believe that. At the same time, I am haunted by the possibility that perhaps she did have the awareness of the depth of the emotional pain she was causing and simply lacked empathy for me. If she knew my pain, empathized with how it might feel to be locked away, prodded, and lied to, she wouldn't have done it in the first place, right? And if she couldn't put herself in my shoes and feel what I felt, does that mean she also didn't feel bad about it? To possess someone, you must see them not as a person but as an object, like property. The literal meaning of possession is to physically take over the property. From that first gaze in the hospital, it was me and Mama against the world. No bad men, no intruders. My birth certificate was her deed to a property rightfully hers. The takeover had begun. That is such a dramatic description of something she's completely surmising, friends. So weird. Okay, Gypsy says, before it was a physical takeover in the form of controlling my body's functions, it was an emotional one. I grew up dreamy-eyed for Mama. When you're little, your world is so small. I had my mother, my bedroom, and my dolls. I was a sucker for dolls. My early memories are of my mother promising a new doll to me if I would just see a new doctor, have a new procedure, nod in agreement, not ask why, hold my tongue. Many say Mama was manipulative, holding the dolls over me like that. But getting the doll was my end game, so wasn't I a willing participant? I was too young at the time for me to blame myself now, but I do wonder if I helped my mother do the things she did to me, to the system, and to my dad. Once again, all the concern and sympathy for Pimp Juice and what he went through. If anyone's coming across the video new, the reason why we call Rod Pimp Juice is because Gypsy referred to him as Pimp Juice in one of her emails. She opened her email to her dad with, "What up, Pimp Juice?" Also, offering a child a doll if they do something that they don't want to do is pretty freaking normal, I think. Gypsy says, dolls were commerce clauses in a long term agreement between my mom and me, but they were also a symbol of innocence and purity. Mama preferred that I not play with Barbie dolls. She didn't want me to see the anatomy, no matter how poorly scaled, of a woman. If I were to undress a doll to change his clothes, I was to see a baby's body without bulges or bumps. Clean, she'd call it. The accessories for a baby doll were a baby bottle and stroller, not provocative hot tub or dream house. The baby doll's companion was its mommy, not a Ken doll, which would have prompted more questions my mother wouldn't want to address. I wonder if I'd had the opportunity for Ken to play with Barbie, would my mother have known about Daddy Claude sooner? Gypsy saying that Dee Dee didn't want her to have Barbies, and then even attaching it to the SA that she claims, saying that maybe if she'd had Barbies, she would have known what to say sooner. Good grief. Once she was called out, people pulled out all these pictures of Gypsy with Barbies, usually given to her by Dee Dee. Well, then she had to backtrack, and her explanation was so silly. She said, well, she didn't want me to have Barbies until I was at least, a little older, like 9 or something. Well, that is normal. Again, most little kids, little girls that enjoy dolls, or boys if they enjoy dolls, whenever they're closer to a baby's age, enjoy baby dolls. Whenever they get closer to actually being a preteen or something like that, they start wanting Barbies and older dolls. Again, very freaking normal. She tries to make all these super normal things into horrifying harbingers of terrible abuse. And it really makes me wonder what Dee Dee had to go through in her home trying, if she tried at any time, to get Gypsy to do something normal. You know what I mean, friends? Okay, Gypsy says, at first, the shame she inflicted was subliminal, like implying that our natural naked state is dirty by preferring clean. But soon enough, Mama became more literal in what she expected from my body. Breasts were sinful and were to be covered. Pubic hair was dirty and should be shaved off. Now, as I write this, I wonder if that kind of brainwashing about my sexuality was really a means to get me to be complicit in hiding my puberty from the outside world, to keep me young and consistent with her documentation. Regardless, for much of my life, I felt confused and conflicted about my womanhood. Okay, once again, I have no idea whether or not any of the details that Gypsy is saying here are true, but children who grow up in Amish communities and the FLDS and other very, very conservative religious communities are taught the same things, that the naked body is dirty and it's unclean and it's sinful. You must hide your breasts. Don't let anyone know that you're developing breasts. In those communities, sometimes young girls are taught that if they get raped, it's their own fault. They must have done something. They must have looked away that tempted the person who raped them. So breasts must be hidden. So once again, Gypsy's acting like Dee Dee is completely unnaturally out of pocket here, but the things that she is describing are things that kids in other situations go through and aren't killing their parents over and trying to make this major dramatic story about. She tries to label every single thing in her childhood as abuse. That's where she runs into problems, friends. Gypsy says, as I do the work of remembering the timeline of my life with her, imagining our first moments together, maternity ward, being dressed as her mini-me, being drafted into a united front against a family she, for whatever reason, felt ostracized from, I don't feel hatred towards my mother. Okay, this isn't the end of the paragraph, but I have to stop right there. She says, being drafted into a united front against a family she, for whatever reason, felt ostracized from. Gypsy claims that her grandpa SA'd both her mom and herself. So obviously she felt ostracized from the family. If Gypsy claims that that is true, then why does she have no understanding of why Dee Dee had issues with her family? What the hell? The cognitive dissonance is just off the charts, friends. Okay, Gypsy says, I've come to see that my mother wanted to keep my world small as a child's. Possibly because as hers became bigger and bigger, she got scared away. In my memories from between 5 and 9 years old, our relationship felt like an innocent love surrounded by toys resembling the small world, not the real world. Fisher Price little people with their barreled bodies and their little cars in my living room in a little Section 8 apartment in the Golden Meadow Projects, where we moved after we left the Blue House after Mama MZ died and Daddy Claude decided to marry Laura, a local nurse who worked with Mama and who Daddy Claude had a long-standing relationship with. That's a way of saying it, a long-standing relationship. Clearly he was cheating on Emma with Laura. Gypsy says, in the confines of our home, I never called my mom Mama, at least not very often, and she rarely called me Gypsy. Names have history. They're bigger than nicknames. Nicknames reduce a person to one small trait. Safe and definable. Around the house, as I watched The Lion King for the 100th time, or pretended to feed kibble to my stuffed Raja tiger from Aladdin. My mother called me baby, and I called her honey. Honey and baby were safe and had no past. My mother's love was in the present and not small at all. She was my honey and I was her baby. Our terms of endearment could be easily swapped with those of a newlywed couple intoxicated by each other's pheromones. Honey, I'd call out to her with my arms outstretched and a bottle in hand. More, honey, more. Well, that's gross, friends. Weird stuff. And I just got to say real quick, Gypsy acted very odd when she was in Southwest Missouri before the murder. When we see her at the Vision Con video, she's like, woo, my party wig. Like, maybe that was how she was in the last few years before the murder after they were in Springfield. But while they were around Aurora, when she was actually in her teen years and stuff, before they moved to Springfield and got the pink habitat house, she really played up trying to look like she had a mental disability. I can absolutely see her stretching her arms out with a baby bottle, going, more honey, more, wanting more hugs from Dee Dee in public. I can totally see that. That tracks with the way that it was described to me that she was acting. Okay, back to the book. Gypsy says, I now see I was her emotional support surrogate very early on, our dynamic resembling a couple instead of a mother-daughter duo. I'm all for the idea of us against the world if you are a fierce single mom raising strong daughters, modeling what can be accomplished when you stick together. But our us against the world looked more like her sticking to me. While I was very young, that stickiness was sweet like molasses. No one's ever going to take as good a care of you as me, baby, she'd say. Molasses, if it's stored right, can last for years before it begins to mold over. If her ghostwriters are listening, these little cooking analogies that you try to add are not making Gypsy any more palatable. They just come across as very, very cringe. And for years, we were each other's company. We bathed together, slept in the same bed together, watched the same daytime television programs. Her interest in sci-fi and fantasy and the People's Court became my interest. When I showed my own curiosity for things separate from her, like Barbie dolls, she'd be there to deflect. Now, you don't want those dolls when you have so many stuffed animals to play with. I don't want Barbie. There's power in numbers, and in my mother's paranoid defensive mind, it had always been Claude and his other 5 children against Dee Dee, especially after Momsy Emma passed. She and her brothers and sisters were like the neighboring towns of Lafourche Parish, stacked one right after the next, separated by invisible boundary lines that kept them out of each other's borders. One of Mama's brothers brought his invisible limit line out in clear view when he kicked us out of our own home. After Momsy Emma died, Claude moved out of the Blue House and bought a new home with his second wife, Laura, leaving just me and Mama living in the Blue House. But Mama told me my uncle claimed Momsy Emma had verbally promised him that he'd get the house after she died, and he wanted what was rightfully promised to him. So one day, after Mama and I came home from one of my doctor's appointments, we found all our stuff out on the front porch and lawn. I remember seeing my Uncle Pookie and Mama yelling at each other on the porch. My Mama told me that my uncle and his wife and kids had moved in and kicked Mama and me out. We're officially homeless, she said. Even though I was about 5 years old, I still remember feeling unsafe when I saw my toys and dolls and nightgowns strewed out on the lawn like that. I wasn't yet in the wheelchair, but Mama already had doctors treating me for asthma, sleep apnea, hearing and vision impairments, and epilepsy, which she claimed were caused by a chromosomal deficiency. And she had taken me out of kindergarten to be homeschooled. Okay, friends, we've all looked at a lot of the medical records, and we know that the sleep apnea Hearing and vision, those were real. The epilepsy, I'm pretty sure she did have some seizures that were documented. I'd have to look back and be sure. However, though, we know that Gypsy wasn't actually diagnosed with a chromosome deletion until 2011 because that particular diagnosis wasn't even available until 2008. So I don't know what she's talking about with saying that Dee Dee was saying that they were due to a chromosomal disorder because we didn't see that in any of the early records we read. Did we, friends? If I've forgotten, please remind me in the comments. In a later conversation with Uncle Pookie, he explained to me that the argument he and Mama had on the porch was sparked by him questioning my mother about my mysterious bad health, telling her, "She needs to be in school, Dee Dee. Why is she not being schooled?" Never one to be told what to do, my mother did what she did best, ran away from those who had my best interest at heart, just because she couldn't handle being told she was wrong. Nobody told Mama she was wrong, not even the doctors. Okay, so once again, Gypsy has given her uncle grace and talked to him clearly because he's told her, "Oh, I was actually standing up for you whenever I kicked you out the house and all your dolls and everything were thrown across the lawn. I wasn't just being greedy for a home. I was worried about you, Gypsy." And she believes him and gives him grace for that over Dee Dee. Interesting, huh, friends? What do y'all think about that? Gypsy says, "I anticipate I will continue to uncover thousands of lies that pixelate the reality my mother designed for me as if I'd been living in a simulation all those years. For a short period of time after we were kicked out, Mama and I stayed at her godmother's house, but soon we got kicked out of there too, since I later learned Mama was caught stealing checks out of her godmother's checkbook. I don't know if she was that desperate for money or if she was just stealing to steal, but right after that, we bounced to New Orleans for a while, where we lived rent-free for weeks in the Ronald McDonald's house. You're not supposed to stay so long. Once we were approved, we finally moved to Golden Meadow Projects, where I lived until I was 9. Okay, let's think about this for a minute, friends. In Dee Dee's position, Rod rented them a house and then left her and didn't pay her enough support to cover it. Dee Dee had a tiny baby. She moves back in with her parents because she can't afford the rent house. Then Gypsy mentions that she had quit her job at the hospital. Well, with a tiny baby that's, on a sleep apnea machine, to keep working at the hospital, which was probably minimum wage, she would have had to have paid a babysitter. Would she have even had a net positive return from working at that point? She probably hoped by moving in with her parents that her mom would be able to watch Gypsy. Then she could get a job, but then her mom died. Her dad moves on with the woman he'd been having an affair with. Dee Dee thinks they've finally got a home, but then the brother comes and kicks him out, throws all their shit out on the yard, and she has to find a roof again. I don't know, friends. If you've been listening to my channel a long time, you know that I'm not quite as forgiving of Dee Dee as most people in this community are, but still, I'm not sure what she was supposed to do in this situation. On the part about Dee Dee stealing checks out of her godmother's checkbook, I don't condone stealing at all. If she did that, that was absolutely wrong. But I find Gypsy's description of it interesting because we saw her describe a lot of things Rod did that were clearly very obviously wrong and just give him all the passes in the world. But whenever she says Dee Dee was caught stealing checks, and this is after they were homeless, they'd been kicked out of the family home, all the stuff, Rod had left, they had to leave a rent house, she couldn't afford everything. Gypsy says, "I don't know if she was that desperate for money or if she was just wanting to steal." She was obviously desperate. You know what I mean, friends? My God. Gypsy says, "Mama knew how to get approved for a lot of things and lived off the system. So I'm not sure if remanding me to a wheelchair was part of the scheme or if it was a symptom of her Munchausen by proxy. Mama scored 3 different government issues phones because she applied for different benefits for different reasons. We lived in Section 8 housing and we were both on Medicaid." Well, we saw in that one email Melissa Moore was trying to set Gypsy up on how to do the exact same thing as if that was no problem. So I'm not sure why Gypsy and Melissa are writing about Dee Dee doing it as if it's a terrible thing, a symptom of her Munchausen by proxy and her scheming. Melissa Moore tried to set Gypsy up to do the exact same thing. Gypsy says, I was confined to a wheelchair after I was in a motorcycle accident when I was 8 years old. Daddy Claude had a Harley, and I went riding one day on the back. Reacting to a car that had cut us off, Daddy Claude swerved out of the way and sideswiped us off the road. I was bleeding when we returned to Mama. After she found out what happened, she rushed me to the hospital, where I was cleared of anything other than a road rash. I went home with an ace bandage, and she nursed me as if I had had an amputation. She brought me a walker, sent me for physical therapy, and after a few months came home with a wheelchair, which I was relegated to permanently. I learned recently that Mama's family members got on Mama for putting me in the wheelchair. That only made her run away with me. At first, she told people I lost use of my legs from the accident, but as we moved around, her stories became more elaborate. She told some people my imaginary seizures damaged the motor function part of my brain. She was real strict when it came to me being still, which is why I was never allowed out of the wheelchair, even in the privacy of our own home. I had to maintain the habit. By the time I was in my teens, she harped on me. Gypsy, I see you moving your legs, she'd say with a rap to my knee. Stop moving them. It's awfully funny that it was so widely and commonly known that Gypsy walked around all the time, that was the reason why Dee Dee blacked out the windows so people wouldn't see it, because it was just a con scheme for money and not Munchausen by proxy, in my opinion, allegedly. That was so well known that Kian even straight up said it on a live, and Gypsy reprimanded him and made him come back all sheepish, looking like Ned Fulmer doing an apology, and say, oh, no, I was wrong. Gypsy says, Mama's health was not the best, as she often reminded me, especially when she wanted to get me to behave or do something I didn't want to do. You know I'm not feeling well, baby. Why are you sassing me? She said she was bipolar and had schizophrenia, but it's unclear whether those were legitimately diagnosed. I did bear witness to her frightening highs and lows. Her type 2 diabetes, which was medically documented, required her to take insulin. It wasn't odd for a woman of her size who lived on Pepsi and milk and who thought having to drink water was a punishment to have diabetes. She was on pain meds because the fusion she had in her leg after a car accident never fully took, causing her chronic debilitating pain, all paid for by disability and Social Security. Again, Gypsy keeps harping on Dee Dee having legit medical conditions paid for by Social Security and disability is a bad thing, a symptom of how terrible she is. As far as I'm concerned, the legitimate help Dee Dee got is fine. Those systems are there to be used. I don't approve of the conning she did. She told everybody that Gypsy was dying of cancer and was never going to live to be an adult. And that's part of the reason why so many people in Southwest Missouri gave them so much. They thought Gypsy was dying and she was not. I'll say that until the end of time, as long as I have this YouTube channel. Dee Dee's big con. She kept telling everyone Gypsy was not going to live to be an adult. Gypsy is not dying. So that was a problem. But Dee Dee getting disability and Social Security for her own legitimate health issues and for Gypsy's legitimate ones, it's not a big deal. I don't understand why Gypsy's acting in this book and why Melissa Moore is allowing it too as one of her ghostwriters to act like that was just such a horrible thing when we know Melissa Moore tried to set Gypsy up to do the same thing. She wanted her to come out and start applying for all these disability benefits and get a job at Walmart because she knew that Gypsy needed to show society that she has the ability to work and manage her own finances and herself in order to be respectable. Gypsy couldn't do that. She blew it up because she's lazy. Now she just sits on lives for a ridiculous amount of hours complaining that people accurately see through her. Plus all the endless rebranding. She's going to be an artist. She's going to be an advocate. She's going to be a what the hell ever. Oh, going to be an AI country music singer. We can't forget that era, friends. Then she had her author era. Now she says the book was all wrong. Okay, last paragraph of this chapter. Gypsy says, with me playing the role of the sick child who required government checks and help from charities and her own compromised health, Mama held me as her shield, her weapon against ever needing her family's assistance again. And she sent Daddy Claude a crystal clear message to that effect. My mother and I attended his wedding ceremony to Laura, dressed all in black. Okay, friends, most people who knew that their dad was cheating on their mom long-term with someone and then saw their dad marry that someone after their mom died would want to act out. Wearing black is honestly one of the quietest, classiest protests I can imagine. I wouldn't have went to the wedding if I was Dee Dee. Also, considering the accusations that Gypsy has made against him, what's with all this Daddy Claude nonsense? I don't get it, friends. I do not get it. Of course, I don't get most of what she does. She doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, friends, I'm going to cut off and edit here. We'll go out with a little palate cleanser as usual. I hope everyone's having a good day. Let me know what y'all think in the comments.